In the end, when the last star gutters and the galaxy's cold bones drift through a void without memory, only one sound will remain. Not the chanting of clerics, nor the weeping of dying empires, but a green roar that has echoed since the first spore split open in the primordial muck. It is the sound of the Orks, not a race, not a culture, a biological apocalypse given teeth and a sense of humor. Listen, and you will hear the tread of billions of feet, the cough of crude shootas, the guttural laughter that causes even space marines to tighten their grip on their bolters. This is the story of the green tide, of those within it who have traded their legs for wheels and their gods for an engine block, and of the one among them who became more than a warlord, who became a crimson streak across the face of eternity. This is the story of the Orks, the speed freaks, and the legend of Wazdakka Gutsmek. The Orks is not born, he is spawned. From the microscopic spores that every greenskin sheds in a constant, invisible rain, the entire ecosystem of the Orkoid race springs forth. First come the fungi, the squigs, the crawling, biting, edible horrors that form the base of a mobile food chain. Then come the Gretchen, the grots, the sniveling underclass. And finally, from the deep, warm fungal pods, the Orks themselves emerge, fully formed and battle-ready, a choppa already clutched in their newborn fist and a burning desire to use it on the nearest living thing. This biological perfection makes the Orks an infestation that can never be cured. You can burn a world to glass, and a century later, the spores will have reclaimed it. The Orks are the galaxy's ultimate survivalists. They have no supply lines because a squig is a meal, a tooth is currency, and a dead Ork's arm makes a perfectly serviceable club. Their technology should not work. It is a lunatic assemblage of scrap, rust, and faith, held together by rivets that have no business holding, and powered by fuel that a tech priest would declare unholy. Yet it does work, because the Orks believe it will. The psychic gestalt of the greenskin race, a field of raw, green-tinted power generated by their collective consciousness, smooths over the cracks in reality. A gun that jams in a human's hand will fire until it glows white-hot in the grip of an Ork who has not even considered the possibility of failure. A vehicle painted red will, by the collective will of millions of Orks who know that the red ones go faster, actually go faster. This is not magic. It is the most honest expression of faith the galaxy has ever known. At the apex of this psychic food chain stand the twin gods of the Orkish pantheon, Gork and Mork. They are not distant, unknowable deities. They are the perfect Orks, the biggest and the strongest, and they fight the gods of chaos with laughter and headbutts in a never-ending war in the warp. Every Ork knows this, and every Ork in his deepest, greenest soul aspires to be like them. Under the iron will of a war boss, Orks gather in their billions, their collective psychic field building into a roaring crescendo that makes the mech boys' inventions more potent, the weird boys' war plashes more devastating, and the boys themselves larger and more aggressive. Yet for all their love of the brawl, not all Orks march to war on their own 2 feet. Within the sprawling, anarchic society of the Greenskins, there exists a subculture so extreme, so single-minded, that even other Orks think they are a bit mad. They are the speed freaks, the cult of speed, and they have taken the core Orkish desire to get into the fight and distilled it into a singular, burning obsession. to get into the fight faster. To a speed freak, the space between battles is an unbearable waste of existence. Why trudge across a continent when you can scream across it on a pillar of fire, arriving not as a soldier but as a meteor? The common orc prizes his choppa, his shooter, the satisfying crunch of a good skull kraken. The speed freak prizes only his throttle, his warbike, his wagon, his scrapjet, his truck. These are not mere vehicles. They are extensions of his green soul, living things that he has built with his own hands and fed with the blood of Prometheum. The relationship between a speed freak and his machine is as intimate as any space marine's bond with his armor, and infinitely more unhinged. A speed freak will speak to his bike, sing to it, threaten it, and when it inevitably explodes, mourn it with a howl of grief that turns seamlessly into a howl of rage as he commandeers the next available chassis. The cult of speed reshapes orc society on a fundamental level. A war boss who follows the cult does not build a fortress of scrap. He builds a raceway. Entire continents fall under the dominion of rolling, never-ending convoys that roar in great, dusty spirals. The boys fighting not over territory, but over the right to lead the pack. The mech boys of the speed freaks are a breed apart, possessed of a very particular divine madness. They craft engines that run on fumes and rage exhaust pipes that vent not just smoke, but the chattering, red-tinged laughter of the gods of speed. To them, the trinity of engineering is weight, power, and color. The first two are negotiable, the third is not. The red ones go faster. This is not a theory, not a slogan, but a law of the universe as immutable as gravity and twice as powerful. When an entire warband of speed freaks paints its buggies, bikes, and jets a deep, arterial crimson, the collective belief of the greenskin race alters local reality, shearing off microfractions of physical resistance until the red-painted machine rockets forward with a speed that defies the Imperium's finest predictions. The speed freaks live their entire lives at this velocity, and they die at it too. To fall in battle with your throttle open, your engine screaming, and a grin of pure, holy ecstasy on your face is to die the truest death an orc can achieve. And when a speed freak dies thus, his brothers do not mourn. They celebrate, for they know his soul has been snatched up into the great convoy in the sky, to race forever in the green-tinged heaven. No orc can say for certain where Wazdakka Gutsmek first felt the speed calling, for his name was already whispered among the evil sons for centuries before his greatest ride. What is known is that he was a mechbo of unparalleled maniacal genius. The Gutsmek was not content with the simple raiding and looting that satisfied lesser war bosses. He saw the galaxy as a single, infinite track, and he intended to race it from end to end. At the heart of his legend is his warbike, or rather, what he called a bike, and what the Imperium's tacticians classified as a high-velocity siege engine. He named it Bike of the Apocalypse, and it was his throne, his temple, and his weapon. More a monstrous, two-wheeled chariot than a conventional mount, Bike of the Apocalypse was a masterpiece of orc engineering forged from the wreckage of 100 battlefields. Its massive front wheel, taller than a space marine, was shielded by an armored cowl painted in the deepest, most violent red ever to streak across a battle zone. The whole infernal machine was studded with enough firepower to level a city block, twin-linked big shooters chattering in synchronized fury, rocket racks slung along its flanks, and an enormous, jagged ram at its prow, fashioned to core Imperial tanks like tin cans. The roar of its engines was said to be audible from orbit, a percussive thunder that rolled across the plains and echoed in the hearts of the orcs who followed it. Wazdakka Gutsmek united the scattered speed freak warbands under a single, crimson banner. They swept from world to world in a tempest of barely controlled warp translation, crashing onto planetary surfaces in a storm of drop pods and ramshackle landers. The speed freaks already throttling their engines before they even hit dirt. Worlds fell within days, their defenders obliterated by a blur of speeding armor and flying lead. The Gutsmek himself was always at the tip of the spear, Bike of the Apocalypse ram pulverizing fortress gates, while his maniacal laughter blared from Vox Casters. He bolted to the frame. His name became a curse across the frontier sectors of the Imperium, a byword for a new level of greenskin brutality, one that could not be dug in against, could not be outflanked, could not be reasoned with. The Forge world of Scalex 6 was a bastion of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Its surface was a labyrinth of manufactorums, armor vaults, and the towering gantries that serviced the god engines of the Titan Legion. When Wazdakka's band arrived into the system, the tech priests did not panic. They trusted in their holy machines. As the Orc assault descended upon the crimson dunes of Primary Continent, the Titans were deployed. To a sane commander, the response would be to retreat, to mass artillery, or to die beneath the god machines, plasma annihilators. To Wazdakka Gutsmek, the Titans were not obstacles, they were pylons, markers on the greatest race he had ever ridden. As the Orc horde scattered under the Titans' opening salvos, the Gutsmek twisted the throttle of Bike of the Apocalypse and aimed his prow at the lead warlord. The Bike surged across the shattered plains, weaving through a forest of explosions, its engine screaming a note of pure, psychotic joy. All around him, his speed freaks howled their approval, many breaking off to charge the other Titans, buying their warboss the time he needed. And so, in the annals of Imperial history, there exists a singular picked slice, captured by a service skull before its destruction. It shows a massive, red-painted blur on a direct collision course with a Titan's head. The logic of the event defies analysis. Wazdakka, seeing a ramp in the wreckage of a downland raider, launched Bike into the air. The two-wheeled monster, spitting fire and death, cleared the Titan's void shields at the exact moment of a power flux, an impossibility that any Magos would later attribute to abominable Orc witchcraft. The armored prow of the Bike, that great jagged ram, struck the warlord's command cockpit like a lance of the Emperor himself. The cockpit detonated. The sacred glass shattered. The princeps and his moderati were annihilated in an instant, their blessed forms pulped by the force of the impact and the roaring, laughing greenskin that burst in among them. Wazdakka Gutsmek, still gripping his handlebars, drove straight through the heart of the god machine's brain. The Titan, its princeps dead and its systems cascading into emergency failure, stood frozen for a single, eternal second. Then, like a toppling mountain, it began to fall. And so the cult of speed rides on. every warbike that coughs to life in the mud of a battle world, every wagon that slews through the ranks of a terrified Imperial Guard platoon, every jet that screams across a sky of fire is a prayer to the Red One. When a Nob guns his engine and smells the holy mixture of promethium and ozone, he bellows the Gutsmek name, and his boys take it up until the very atmosphere vibrates with it. The galaxy is a sepulcher of dead empires, a grim and dark abattoir where hope is the rarest of poisons. But through that darkness, a red shift moves forever away from the cold and the still, heading towards a finish line that exists only in the mind of its rider. Wazdakka Gutsmek rides. The wheels never stop. The red ones go faster, and the race will outlast the stars.